what we're gonna have to do is dip each of their beaks in the water. They can't really jump too well anyway. Just a little bit. You take your finger behind its head and just dip its beak into the water. Make sure that it's got a little water on it. Yep. See how it's drinking a little bit? Yeah. And then you can just put it over there, and they'll figure it out. Definitely, but you got to make sure that their beak actually.
Weir River Farm sort of stands as one of the last bastions of like a real, true working farm. And in the sense that it is a working farm, you know, we do all of our own hay production, we raise all of our own animals here, we do breeding programs. So as the livestock manager, I'm responsible for managing the breeding programs that we have for the cows and the sheep. I'm responsible for the day-to-day maintenance and care for the animals. My job as the livestock manager is to make sure that they're all fed, watered, taken care of, and that the minutia of the slaughter dates and the retail outlet is managed for everybody. Yeah. A livestock manager of a meat program is going to have different priorities than a livestock manager for, say, like a beef herd that's for leather or for dairy, because you know, if your product is entering the consumer market in the form of food, there are a lot of other things that you need to be careful with and concerned about that dairy or textiles just wouldn't be concerned with. Having grass-fed beef and grass-fed sheep is huge. Grain is not a normal dietary intake for any kind of ruminant. Like corn grain is solely used by the meat industry to induce really rapid growth, and it has a lot of negative side effects with respect to fat content, and nutrient imbalances in the actual meat and the animals themselves. We have to produce all of the hay ourselves off of our own land. We do our best to avoid using non-organic fertilizers, so we will spend a little more to, you know, buy organic fertilizers, you know, non-toxic pesticides if we have to use that, in order to make sure that, you know, we're not introducing anything negative into their diet, into their life cycle. The square bales, we bale, they're small enough so that they dry out and they stay dry throughout the winter, so there's no fermentation process. With these ones, the intention is that they will actually ferment. So they actually get a different smell. They start building up sugars as the decomposition progresses, so you get a lot more carbohydrates and different nutrients than you would from square bales. We have both meat-oriented animals, but we also have engagement animals. So we have a couple horses, some layer chickens, a couple rabbits, a couple cats. We have to be very careful and aware of what the cows, the chickens, the goats, the sheep, the pigs eat, and their health. Because we are making a product that enters the food system, we are endlessly concerned and constantly striving to make sure that our animals are as healthy as possible and as happy as possible. Come on, there you go. Want some? What's your problem? So Nutmeg used to be around 300 pounds overweight, which you can imagine is pretty significant for a 1,000-pound animal. We got her down to size, but she has what's essentially a form of horse diabetes, which is kind of ridiculous. But if we didn't moderate how much she eats, she would literally eat herself to death. I've seen her fall over because she was so messed up from eating too much. Her lip gets all limp and floppy. It's very strange, but she's our little medical miracle, huh? Yeah.
I was thinking about it. I've known Nate for almost 10 years now. And when I first met Nate, he was working in the market garden over on the top of the hill, which had just started. I think that when I first met Nate, his commitment to this place was undying, and that's one of those the same qualities that Nate has today. That his love of this farm has just never wavered. And so Nate's current role as the livestock manager is really built on 10, 12 years of his experience with this particular farm in this community.
My official career with the Trustees and on Weir River Farm started when I was 17 as a volunteer with the community supported agriculture CSA, veggie CSA option that we had running out of here. I started here the first year that we were trying to establish that. A lot of my experience and a lot of the skills that I've developed over the years really came from just being here and watching people who really had significant skill sets in the realm of meat production that that you really just wouldn't be able to get at a university or wherever. And at that point, I really had no idea what I wanted to do in terms of my career. And I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't really know what for. I went to college because I knew that I wanted to be involved in ecology, nature, marine science, science in general. Biology to me seemed the best avenue for that because I genuinely am curious about life. I'm curious about ecosystem interactions, and also just the notion that ecosystem services that are provided by nature have actual value and they have real impacts on how we have to live our lives. I went to Connecticut College down in New London. As I continued to work here over the summers that I was in school, I realized that I didn't want to do research because that sounded really boring. I started to realize, wait a minute, I actually really like this place. I don't see myself somewhere else. I see myself here. This must have been my first year as working on the stewardship team. And back then, stewardship was also involved in agriculture and livestock on the farm. So we were, both responsible for maintaining World's End as well as hay production out there. It was a very long day. It started at 6 in the morning and went until 11 o'clock at night. And at the end of it, we had square baled 1,000 bales. We had loaded it, baled it, and stored it up here in the loft in the red barn in a day. It was just shocking to me that 4 guys could do all this in a day. And one of the things that I really like about this barn is because it's so old, it still has a lot of the accoutrement of how they used to do things. I just remember standing at the hay doors in the pitch black, and it was a gorgeous clear night, and all of the other guys had left, and I was still just standing here because I said that I would lock up. And I just sat on the edge and just stared out at this place and sort of just like reveled in the beauty and the notion that my involvement in that would make this place even better for the people who come here.
So one of the first days, or at least the first week, I worked with Nate. It was a Saturday at World's End. It was a day when we had quite a bit of volunteer work happening on the property. Being new to the trustees and new to the properties myself, I kind of knew I was going to be leaning on him pretty heavily and kind of watching him interact and show all these volunteers the work they were about to do. But it was pretty exciting to see firsthand in the first couple days of my working experience at the Trustees, his level of excitement and enthusiasm. I think that showed me immediately how much energy he had and how much interest he has for the Trustees and for properties like the farm and World's End.
Being a volunteer, that was my first step. Then I became a seasonal staff person on the stewardship team. In April 2016, I came back and started working full-time as a land steward. I just always had that overarching need to make sure that these places stayed as beautiful as I remembered them. Becoming a land steward, that was my job. That's what I did, is managed these parks and the landscapes, the scenery, the ecology of it. When the previous livestock manager moved on, I decided that instead of continuing at this point into the pure conservation side, I wanted to expand and see how I could develop my skill set as well as influence this place that's shaped my life in a very significant way. And a lot of things that have to do with sustainability and conservation often coincide with meat production and agriculture, because agriculture requires a lot of land, and that's conservation, that's what we're all about. I'm coming in at a time when Weir River Farm has become kind of a focal point for the organization. And so, with the added interests, obviously we might have access to more money in terms of investment. So like right now, I'm in the process of coming up with a plan to revamp the barnyard and think about how the fence lines interact with the consumer experience as well as with the animals. I was really curious to see how I could use the skills that I developed on the conservation side to influence how we manage livestock here. There are a lot of things that we actually have to be concerned with respect to fertilizer use, herbicides, things like that you really just wouldn't be concerned with if it wasn't conservation land. But it really forces you to be a lot more creative with the way that you approach things. So I found that to be an interesting challenge. Hey guys. We really do wear multiple hats, the biggest hats being livestock production and education. We run summer camps throughout the summer for kids, as well as open barnyards and story hours so that just the general public can come and interact with the livestock in a positive way. Yeah, so for all like the barnyard events, we have people park up here, and then they walk down this chute here, and you can see the barnyard straight down through, and this takes them all the way down to the top. It is very interesting to me that people will, their whole lives they eat food, but they have no idea where it comes from. They just don't. And so being able to provide that connection is super valuable, and I think a lot of the people who come through here really benefit from gaining some more understanding about that. My role often is more of an advisory role when it comes to the children's programs. But I mean, I'm out there in the barnyard talking to people on the weekends throughout the summer. I sometimes will do teaching events where we'll talk about how you make soap, or how you do beekeeping, or how you raise backyard chickens. When I'm educating the children about this, it just ups the likelihood that they will continue on in their lives, maybe making more ethical decisions about how they eat. It helps their parents, think about, okay, do I really want to be feeding my kid something that has had so many antibiotics and just a bunch of pesticides and herbicides just dumped into it? Or do I want to spend a little more, because it is a little more expensive to do small scale agriculture, but maybe it's worth spending an extra $5 on the things that I'm eating in order to pay it forward for my health. Yeah, it's, I mean, we do our best to, use as ethical and sustainable husbandry methods as we can. Like with the cows, they're all grass-fed. The pigs and the chickens, we have to feed them grain, mainly just because we don't have the acreage to support any kind of grass-fed operation for those particular animals. But everybody who's got the chicken says that it's the best they've ever had. When you factor in the fact that they have access to open space, sun, everything, they're a lot happier, which actually contributes pretty heavily to the flavor in the meat. If you, for example, if you brought an animal to slaughter that was scared or angry or whatever it was, just by virtue of that, it releases all of that into the animal. But with these animals, it's all much easier. We try to use methods that are as low impact on the animal as possible, basically. So
animal stress is something that Nate is incredibly gifted at managing. We try to keep that levels low, and that does translate directly into the quality of the meat that comes through here.
People really get a lot of emotional benefit just out of the notion that they're doing something in their lives the right way. People come back into the meat sales and they say, that's the best chicken that I've ever had in my life. And I'm like, all right, that's awesome. That's great. That is exactly what I want to provide. I think one thing that's important to consider is that people always need food. And I think that there's really been a big cultural shift over the past couple of decades. I think that trending forward as this country comes around to the notion of sustainability and environmentalism as more of an approach to certain things like conservation and food production, rather than just this sort of nebulous idea that we should just keep things the way they are. I think as more and more people from the younger generations buy into that, we're going to see a resurgence of small-scale agriculture. We're going to see a resurgence of localized food production that pulls us away from the hugely damaging commercial production aspect that has really become ingrained in this country. Breaking it back down to how do you do it in the most efficient way, but also in a way that respects the land, respects the animals, and respects the people that are doing it. Polythayer Star donated the land to the trustees in '99 for $1 to the trustees. This land had been in Polythayer Star's family going back into the 1800s, and they had utilized it as a gentleman's horse farm. Up until the early 1900s, small-scale agriculture was just the norm. That was much more widespread. So, you would just see a lot of small farms around your area. There would be various farmers markets that you could go to get your veggies, your meat, your eggs. As commercial interests have pushed smaller scale operations out, it's just become a rarity to see a place that has a big red barn, that has all of the iconic parts, but actually continues in the tradition of small-scale farming, right? So the character of this place really stems from the fact that, you know, Massachusetts agriculture isn't as big of an economy as it was. I think that Polly, when she was getting older and she knew that her daughters didn't want to continue that tradition, that she wanted the spirit of this place to continue and be managed in perpetuity, which is the entire point of conservation. She looked to the trustees as sort of the actor in that situation to provide that reassurance to her that this would stay as she wanted it to forever. This whole place is so beautiful. I mean, the garden and grove trails that are off the back of the access road, that held a lot of significance to Polly. She, in her quitclaim that transferred ownership of the property over to the trustees, she specifically said that she wanted the garden, the grove, and the English woodlands to be maintained as they had been, with this very sweeping, open, you know, sort of low undergrowth woods style where you just walk through the trees and you get that sense of just sort of this connection to nature. I don't know, I really like this view when it's like really nice and bright out. So my favorite spot on the farm, it would have to be the top of the Yellow House, it's up on Turkey Hill Lane, and it actually used to be Polly Thayer Starr's art studio. And so if you go up to the roof of the Yellow House, you see all of the South Shore, the harbor, World's End, and Boston right off in the distance. And it's just this really gorgeous view of like sort of contemporary with Boston in the back, and just sort of this step back into history and tradition, you know, in the immediate farm. It's a very unique view to have, you know, Boston, which is a very progressive and new city, and then you have also this landscape that has been for centuries essentially unchanged. And I just find that I have a very deep connection when I'm sitting up there just watching, you know, like my cows wander around in the pastures, and the horses messing around in the barnyard. That in particular has a lot of significance for me. Well, so actually with this breed, the Belted Galloways, so they have a coarse outer fur coat that they keep throughout the year, but they actually have about 4,000 hairs per square inch right at their skin. So the outer hair keeps all the like ice and freezing rain and snow off of them, and then that really tight underlayer keeps any moisture from actually getting to their skin. So they actually don't have to build up that layer of fat to insulate them throughout the winter, which is one of the reasons that they're a much healthier breed for beef, because
farming is an interesting
they typically
field to work in. I found, and the individuals that I've worked with over the years, it's a pretty diverse set of perspectives, but there are certain patterns. And the one that I found that Nate kind of fits into is Nate's top priority, and you can almost measure a farmer's perspective based on where they prioritize their time, effort, emotional stability, because that's what it is. Farming is 100% a lifestyle that has to be ingrained in what you do every day, because it doesn't stop. And so we've had conversations going into midnight about animal care, about an animal that might have had a very unexpected issue that Nate cannot sleep without addressing that. And that happened. We were 4 a.m. We had a calf that got stuck in the birth canal. The two of us, along with a former manager here, we were out there pulling that calf out of that birth canal, delivering her, and she made it. And Nate was, right there. And he's always been right there. And that's what I was thinking. Every story that I can think of working with Nate, he's right there. Yeah. And every animal that we've had here, there was a boar here that was a massive boar here a few years ago, and Nate and him were best buddies. And I think Nate used to walk him around like a dog, without a leash, obviously. But Nate's had that relationship with specific animals, well, since I met him, and that hasn't changed.
Myself, or maybe yourself, for example, can walk into the barnyard and maybe feel comfortable, but not natural. And so when you watch Nate, even yesterday, when I watched him offloading large round bales into the pasture of 30 plus cows, I know I would be very intimidated, and it wouldn't come natural to me to kind of be working around these very large animals that are thousands of pounds and very hungry. But someone like Nate you can see that, and you can sense that he's very natural around the animals, and it makes a huge difference to the animals that he's working with. So when a 2,000-pound cow kind of can sense the fact that you feel comfortable around him, then you have a much safer interaction with that animal.
Where are you, buddy? Where you at? Where's my pal? Where's my buddy? Hi, pal.
And that's where his relationships with animals, I think, comes out in how the production model flourishes, and how being able to provide this meat to the community really comes full circle.
The closer you can get to the source of your food, the better it is for the environment, the better it is for the animals, and the better it is for you. You know, what we could do is get rid of all the fence lines and just have one big pasture that we have all of the animals in. But the problem is that has negative consequences for the soil and the earth that the pastures are composed of. So by doing a rotational grazing pattern, we prevent the cows from overgrazing and hurting the soil with their poop, and make sure that the grass has enough time to recover as they're staged around. There's a lot of things that we do, like rotational grazing, like grass-fed, you know, not keeping them in cages, that's a big thing, that they all are just parts to a greater whole when you consider that, you know, cows and animals, they have emotions, they certainly do, and so if you have an unhappy animal, it's gonna lead to a lower quality of meat. There's actually statistical data that's proven that an unhappy, scared animal actually tastes worse than a happy animal. And so it has to do with hormones, it has to do with certain things that get released within the body of the animal. But you know, if you look at every stage of an animal's life and you try and point out where things can go wrong, and then you try and tailor their experience to avoid that, that is how you get to a successful, happy program. I have really gained a lot of respect for people who do livestock and agriculture work. I think it takes an incredible amount of dedication and sacrifice in order to achieve those goals, considering that it's a product that doesn't last forever. I mean, it ends up getting consumed. You know, it's a very strange production, notion of production, but it's something that I've really found a lot of joy and a certain amount of honor in trying to produce as high a quality of product as you can. Right. If people come and they want to be engaged, pretty much every time they come back. And I have seen a lot of people come through this place, and everybody who really got something out of their experience here, they come back and they add to it. I'm still in touch with so many of the people that I've worked here with before in the past. And they always ask, hey, how's the farm doing? You know, like, how are the animals? I gotta get down there and check it out, because it's been a little while. There's a lot of benefits to be had from working in nature. And, you know, if my involvement in that can be to help out with this place that's in my hometown, I'm happy with it.